Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepbooks reading tonight. Settle in, slow everything down, and let the soft rain in the background carry you deeper into the quiet. Before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss a new chapter. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing that. If you want full early access to entire books, join the Patreon where complete series are available. Now take a breath. Get comfortable, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle hum, and let's drift together into tonight's story. I was sitting in my room trying to force my mind to concentrate on the familiar text of the third act of Macbeth, but my ears were straining for the sound of my old truck. Even over the pounding rain outside, I thought I would have heard the engine's heavy roar as it returned. When I went to peek out the curtain, a nervous action I repeated too often. It was simply there, parked silently in the drive. I wasn't looking forward to the rest of Friday, and the day immediately lived up to all of my low expectations. The morning was filled with the inevitable comments about my fainting incident. Jessica especially seemed to enjoy that story, but thankfully Mike had kept his mouth shut, so no one seemed to know anything about Edward's sudden involvement. The first real interrogation began in trigonometry when Jessica leaned over and asked what Edward Cullen had wanted yesterday. I answered her truthfully, saying I honestly didn't know because he never really managed to get to the point of his sudden visit. She kept fishing, observing that I had looked quite angry during our exchange, and I simply met her gaze, keeping my expression blank as I asked her if I had truly looked that way. She then commented that she had never seen him sit with anyone outside of his family before, declaring the whole event to be profoundly weird. I agreed quietly with her, and she seemed annoyed, flipping her dark curls with impatience. I guessed she had been desperately hoping for some dramatic detail to pass on to the others. The worst feeling that entire Friday was the sinking knowledge that even though I knew he wasn't going to be there, a foolish part of me still hoped to see him. When I walked into the cafeteria with Jessica and Mike, I couldn't stop my eyes from sliding immediately to his table, where Rosalie, Alice, and Jasper were sitting close together, talking. A heavy gloom engulfed me then, and I realized I had no idea how long I would have to wait before I would see him again. At my own table, everyone was buzzing with excitement over our plans for the very next day, a Saturday outing to the beach. Mike was animated again, expressing great faith in the local weatherman who had promised us a full day of sun. I told myself I would have to see that sun before I could truly believe the prediction, but I noticed the air felt warmer today, almost 60 degrees. During lunch, I caught a few sharp, unfriendly glances from Lauren, a reaction I didn't quite understand until we were all walking out of the room together, and I ended up right behind her. I was just a foot away from her slick, silver blonde hair, and she was clearly unaware of my presence as I heard her muttering to Mike. She sneered my name as she wondered aloud why I didn't simply sit with the Cullens from now on. I had never noticed what an unpleasant nasal voice she had, and I was genuinely surprised by the malice in her tone, realizing I didn't know her well enough for her to dislike me so intensely. Mike whispered back that I was his friend and that I sat with them, his loyalty tinged with territory. I paused immediately, letting Jess and Angela pass ahead of me, unwilling to hear anything more of their harsh judgment. That night at dinner, Charlie seemed enthusiastic about my trip to La Push in the morning, and I felt he was trying to mitigate the guilt he felt for leaving me home alone on the weekends. He knew the names of all the kids going, along with their parents and probably their great-grandparents, and he seemed to entirely approve of the company. I briefly wondered if he would approve quite as much of my unvoiced plan to ride to Seattle with Edward Cullen, a detail I certainly wasn't going to tell him. I asked him casually if he knew of a place called Goat Rocks or something similar, explaining that I thought it was south of Mount Rainier. He sounded surprised, asking me why, and I simply shrugged, saying some kids had been talking about camping there. He explained that it wasn't a good place for camping because there were far too many bears, and most people only visited the area during the hunting season. I murmured a quiet "oh" and excused it by saying I must have gotten the name wrong. I had intended to sleep late, but an unusual brightness woke me, and when I opened my eyes I saw a clear yellow light streaming through my window. I hurried immediately to the glass to check, and sure enough, there was the sun itself. It was lower in the sky than expected and felt distant, but it was definitively the sun. Clouds ringed the horizon, but a large patch of blue was visible in the middle, and I lingered by the window, afraid the blue might disappear if I left it. The meeting point was the Newton's Olympic Outfitters store, just north of town, a place I had seen but never stopped at. Having no need for serious outdoor supplies, in the parking lot, I immediately recognized Mike's Suburban and Tyler's Sentra, and as I parked, I saw the group standing around Mike's vehicle. Eric was there, along with two boys I was fairly sure were Ben and Connor, and Jess was flanked by Angela and Lauren. 3 other girls stood with them, including one I remembered falling over in gym on Friday. As I got out of my truck, that girl gave me a dirty look and whispered something to Lauren, who shook out her corn silk hair and eyed me scornfully. I sighed internally, accepting that it was going to be one of those difficult days. At least Mike was genuinely happy to see me. He called out, delighted that I had come, and reminded me that he had promised the sun today. I told him I had already said I was coming, and he explained they were waiting for Lee and Samantha, then asked if I had invited anyone else. I lied lightly, saying nope, while wishing desperately that a miracle would occur and Edward would suddenly appear. Mike looked satisfied, then asked if I would ride in his car, noting the only other option was Lee's mum's minivan. I agreed easily, saying, sure. He smiled blissfully, clearly showing how simple it was to make him happy, and promised me the shotgun seat. I had to hide my chagrin, knowing it wasn't that simple to keep both Mike and Jessica happy at the same time, and I could already see her glaring at us. Luckily, the numbers worked out in my favour when Lee brought 2 extra people, making every seat necessary. I managed to quickly wedge Jess in between Mike and me in the front of the Suburban, a move that appeased her, even if Mike could have handled it more gracefully. The drive was only 15 miles to La Push from Forks, with dense green forests lining the road and the wide Quileute River snaking beneath us twice. I was glad for the window seat. We had rolled the windows down, trying to combat the claustrophobic feeling of 9 people packed inside, and I tried to absorb as much sunlight as possible. I had been to the beaches around La Push many times during my summers with Charlie, so the mile-long crescent of First Beach was familiar, yet still breathtaking. The water was a dark grey, even in the sunlight, heaving white-capped waves onto the rocky shore. Islands with sheer cliff sides rose out of the steel harbour waters, crowned with soaring fir trees. The beach had only a thin border of actual sand, giving way immediately to millions of large, smooth stones in every shade from terracotta to blue-grey. The tide line was strewn with huge driftwood trees, bleached bone-white by the salt waves, some piled together, others lying solitary. A brisk, cool, briny wind came sweeping off the waves, and pelicans floated on the swells while gulls and a lone eagle wheeled above them. The clouds still circled the edges of the sky, but for now the sun shone bravely within its halo of blue. We picked our way down to the beach, Mike leading us to a ring of driftwood logs that had obviously been used for parties like ours before. There was a fire circle already in place, filled with black ashes. Eric and the boy I thought was Ben gathered broken branches of driftwood, and soon had a teepee-shaped construction built atop the old cinders. Mike kneeled by the fire, lighting one of the smaller sticks with a cigarette lighter, and asked if I had ever seen a driftwood fire. I was sitting on one of the logs with the other girls clustered nearby. I told him no, as he carefully placed the blazing twig against the structure. He told me to watch the colours, lighting another small branch. The flames started to lick up quickly, and I noticed in surprise that the fire was blue. He explained that the salt in the wood caused the colour, asking if it wasn't pretty. He lit one more piece, and then came to sit by me, thankfully with Jess on his other side, where she claimed his attention. I watched the strange blue and green flames crackle toward the sky. After about half an hour of chatter, some of the boys wanted to hike to the nearby tidal pools. This presented a dilemma. I loved the pools, having been fascinated by them since I was a child, but I had also fallen into them often. The memory of Edward's quiet request that I not fall into the ocean reminded me of the risk. Lauren settled the decision for me. She didn't want to hike and was wearing the wrong shoes. Most of the other girls besides Angela and Jessica decided to stay on the beach as well. I waited until Tyler and Eric committed to staying before I quietly got up to join the pro-hiking group. Mike gave me a huge smile when he saw that I was coming. The hike wasn't too long, though I disliked losing the sky under the thick tree canopy. The green light of the forest felt oddly murky and ominous, contrasting sharply with the loud adolescent laughter around me. I had to watch each step carefully, avoiding roots below and branches above, and I soon fell behind the main group. Eventually I broke through the emerald confines of the forest and found the rocky shore again. It was low tide, and a tidal river flowed past us on its way to the sea. Along its banks, the shallow pools that never completely drained were teeming with miniature life. I was very cautious not to lean too far over the little ocean ponds. The others were fearless, leaping over the rocks, perching precariously on the edges. I found a very stable rock on the fringe of one of the largest pools and sat there cautiously, spellbound by the natural aquarium below me. Bright anemones pulsed ceaselessly in the current, shells scurried about the edges, and starfish stuck motionless to the rocks, while one small black eel wove through the green weeds, waiting for the sea to return. I was completely absorbed, except for the small part of my mind that wondered what Edward was doing now. Finally the boys were hungry, and I got up stiffly to follow them back. I tried to keep up better through the woods this time, but I still naturally fell a few times. I ended up with shallow scrapes on my palms and green stains on the knees of my jeans, but it could have been worse. When we got back to First Beach, the group we'd left behind had multiplied. As we approached, we saw the shining black hair and copper skin of the newcomers, teenagers from the reservation who had come to socialize. The food was already being passed around, and the boys hurried to claim a share while Eric introduced us as we entered the driftwood circle. Angela and I were the last to arrive. As Eric said our names, I noticed a younger boy sitting on the stones near the fire glance up at me with interest. I sat down next to Angela, and Mike brought us sandwiches and sodas while the oldest boy rattled off the names of the 7 others with him. All I caught was that one of the girls was also named Jessica, and the boy who noticed me was named Jacob. It was relaxing to sit with Angela, who was a restful person and didn't feel the need to fill every silence. She left me free to think undisturbed while we ate. I was thinking about how disjointedly time flowed in forks, sometimes a blur with single images standing out, and other times every second significant and etched in my mind. I knew exactly what caused that difference, and it disturbed me. During lunch, the clouds started to advance, slinking across the blue sky, casting long shadows across the beach and blackening the waves. As people finished eating, they started to drift away. Some walked down to the edge of the waves to skip rocks. Others gathered for a second trip to the tide pools. Mike, with Jessica shadowing him, headed up to the one shop in the village. By the time they all had scattered, I was sitting alone on my driftwood log, with Lauren and Tyler occupying themselves nearby, with a CD player and 3 teenagers from the reservation perched around the fire circle, including Jacob. A few minutes after Angela left with the hikers, Jacob sauntered over to take her place by my side. He looked young, perhaps 14 or 15, with long, glossy black hair pulled back at the nape of his neck. His skin was beautiful and russet-coloured, and his eyes were dark. My positive opinion of his looks was immediately damaged by his first words. He asked if I was Isabella Swan, which felt exactly like the first day of school all over again. I sighed and corrected him, saying, "Bella." He introduced himself as Jacob Black and held out his hand. He then explained that I had bought his dad's truck. I felt relieved and shook his sleek hand, saying I should probably remember him. He explained he was the youngest and that I would remember his older sisters, Rachel and Rebecca. I recalled them instantly. Charlie and Billy had often thrown us together during my visits, but we were all too shy to make much progress as friends. I asked if his sisters were here now, and Jacob shook his head. Rachel had a scholarship to Washington State, and Rebecca married a Samoan surfer and now lived in Hawaii. I whispered. Married. Wow, stunned that the twins were only a little over a year older than I was. He asked how I liked the truck, and I told him I loved it and that it ran great. He laughed, admitting it was slow, and said he was relieved Charlie bought it because his dad wouldn't let him work on another car while they had a perfectly good vehicle right there. I objected that it wasn't that slow, and he instantly asked if I had tried to go over 60. I admitted no, and he told me that was good and not to try it. Grinning, I couldn't help grinning back and offered in my truck's defense that it did great in a collision. He agreed with another laugh that a tank probably couldn't take out that old monster. I asked if he built cars, and he said he did, when he had free time and parts. He joked, asking if I knew where he could get his hands on a master cylinder for a 1986 Volkswagen Rabbit. I laughed, telling him sorry. I hadn't seen any lately, but I would keep my eyes open for him. He was very easy to talk with. He flashed a brilliant smile, looking at me appreciatively, a look I was learning to recognize. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Lauren called out from across the fire, asking in an insolent tone if I knew Jacob. He laughed, smiling at me again, and replied that they had known each other, sort of, since he was born. Lauren said, "How nice," though she didn't sound like she meant it, and her eyes narrowed. She called out my name again, watching my face, and then said she had been telling Tyler it was too bad none of the Cullens could come out today, asking if anyone thought to invite them. The tall, older boy interrupted, before I could respond, asking if she meant Dr. Carlyle Cullen's family. He said in a deep voice that closed the subject, "The Cullens don't come here," completely ignoring her question. Tyler immediately tried to win back her attention by asking her opinion on a CD. I stared at the deep-voiced boy, taken aback, but he was looking away toward the dark forest behind us. His tone implied more than just that the Cullens didn't come here. It implied they were prohibited. His manner left a strange impression on me. Jacob interrupted my thoughts, asking if Fawkes was driving me insane yet. I grimaced and replied that was an understatement, and he grinned understandingly. I was still turning over the brief comment on the Cullens and had a sudden foolish inspiration. It was a stupid plan, but I needed information. I hoped young Jacob was inexperienced around girls so he wouldn't see through my pitiful attempts at flirting. I asked if he wanted to walk down the beach with me, trying to imitate the way Edward looked up from underneath his eyelashes. I knew it wouldn't have the same effect, but Jacob jumped up willingly enough. As we walked north across the stones, the clouds finally closed ranks, causing the sea to darken and the temperature to drop. I shoved my hands deep into my jacket pockets. I asked what his age was, trying not to look idiotic as I fluttered my eyelids like I had seen girls do on the television. He confessed he had just turned 15, looking flattered. I faked surprise, telling him I would have thought he was older, and he explained he was tall for his age. I asked archly if he came up to Fawkes much, sounding idiotic to myself. I was afraid he would accuse me of fraud, but he still seemed flattered. He admitted not too much, but said when he finished his car he could go up as much as he wanted, amending, after he got his license. I asked who that older boy was that Lauren was talking to, saying he seemed too old to hang out with us, purposefully lumping myself in with the youngsters to show I preferred Jacob. He informed me that was Sam, and he was 19. I asked innocently what he had been saying about the doctor's family. He looked away toward James Island, confirming that the Cullens weren't supposed to come onto the reservation. I asked why not, and he glanced back, biting his lip. He whispered, "Oops, I'm not supposed to say anything about that." I tried to make my smile alluring, promising I wouldn't tell anyone and that I was just curious. He smiled back, looking allured, then lifted one eyebrow and asked ominously if I liked scary stories. His voice husky. I enthused that I loved them, trying to smoulder at him. Jacob strolled to a nearby driftwood tree that had roots sticking out, and he perched lightly on one of them while I sat beneath him. He stared down at the rocks, a smile hovering around his lips, clearly trying to make the story good. I focused on keeping the intense interest I felt hidden from my eyes. He asked if I knew any of their old stories about where the Quaaludes came from, and I admitted not really. He explained there were many legends, some claiming to date back to the flood, where the ancient Quaaludes tied canoes to the tallest trees to survive. He smiled to show how little stock he put in those histories. Another legend, he said, claimed they descended from wolves who were still their brothers, making it against tribal law to kill them. Then his voice dropped lower, focusing on the stories about the Cold Ones. I asked, no longer faking my intrigue. The Cold Ones, he confirmed it, saying there were stories of the Cold Ones as old as the wolf legends, and some much more recent. According to legend, his own great-grandfather knew some of them, and was the one who made the treaty that kept them off their land. He rolled his eyes as he mentioned his great-grandfather, a tribal elder like his father. He explained that the Cold Ones were the natural enemies of the wolf, not the normal wolf, but the wolves that turned into men, the ones I would call werewolves. I asked if werewolves had enemies, and he replied only one. I stared at him earnestly, trying to disguise my impatience. Jacob continued that the Cold Ones were traditionally their enemies, but the pack that came to their territory during his great-grandfather's time was different. They didn't hunt the way others of their kind did. They weren't supposed to be dangerous to the tribe, so his great-grandfather made a truce with them. If they promised to stay off the reservation lands, the Quaalude people wouldn't expose them to the pale faces, and he winked at me. I tried to understand, asking why the treaty was necessary if they weren't dangerous. He explained there was always a risk for humans around the Cold Ones, even the civilized clan, because you never knew when they might get too hungry to resist, and he deliberately worked menace into his tone. I asked what he meant by civilized. He claimed they didn't hunt humans, supposedly preying on animals instead. I tried to keep my voice casual, asking how this fit in with the Cullens, wondering if they were like the Cold Ones his great-grandfather met. He paused dramatically, whispering, "They are the same ones." He must have thought the expression on my face was fear inspired by his story, because he smiled, pleased, and continued. He explained there were more of them now, a new female and a new male, but the rest were the same ones. Even in his great-grandfather's time, they already knew of the leader, Carlyle, who had been here and gone before my people had even arrived. He was fighting a smile. I finally asked what they were, what the Cold Ones were. He smiled darkly and replied in a chilling voice, "Blood drinkers. Your people call them vampires." I stared out at the rough surf after he answered, uncertain of what my face was exposing. He laughed delightedly, pointing out that I had goosebumps raised on my skin. I complimented him, still staring into the waves, saying he was a good storyteller. He mused that it was crazy stuff, and no wonder his dad didn't want them talking about it. I couldn't control my expression enough to look at him yet, but I promised I wouldn't give him away. He laughed, saying he guessed he had just violated the treaty. I promised again that I would take it to the grave, and then I shivered. I told him seriously not to say anything to Charlie, because my dad had been angry at Billy when he heard that some of them weren't going to the hospital since Dr. Cullen started working there. I assured him I won't, of course not. He asked in a playful but worried tone if I thought they were just a bunch of superstitious natives. I still hadn't looked away from the ocean. I finally turned and smiled at him as normally as I could, telling him no. I thought he was very good at telling scary stories, and held up my arm to show him I still had goosebumps. He smiled and said, "Cool." Then, the sound of the beach rocks clattering warned us that someone was approaching. Our heads snapped up and we saw Mike and Jessica about 50 yards away walking toward us. Mike called out my name in relief, waving his arm. Jacob asked if Mike was my boyfriend, alerted by the jealous edge in Mike's voice. I whispered, "No, definitely not." I was grateful to Jacob and eager to make him happy, so I winked at him, carefully turning away from Mike to do so. He smiled, elated by my inept flirting. He started to say, "So when I get my license," and I quickly interrupted, suggesting he should come see me in Forks so we could hang out sometime. I felt guilty as I said this, knowing I'd used him, but I genuinely liked Jacob and felt he was someone I could easily be friends with. Mike reached us now with Jessica a few paces back. I could see his eyes appraising Jacob and looking satisfied at his obvious youth. Mike asked where I had been, and I volunteered that Jacob had just been telling me some really interesting local stories. I smiled warmly at Jacob, and he grinned back. Mike paused, reassessing the situation as he watched our camaraderie, before finally saying they were packing up because it looked like it was going to rain soon. We all looked up at the glowering sky, which certainly did look like rain. I jumped up, agreeing that I was coming. Jacob said it was nice to see me again, clearly taunting Mike a bit. I told him it really was, and promised that the next time Charlie came down to see Billy, I would come too. His grin stretched across his face, saying that would be cool. I added an earnest, "And thanks." I pulled up my hood as we tramped across the rocks toward the parking lot. A few drops were beginning to fall, making black spots on the stones where they landed. When we got to the Suburban, the others were already loading everything back in. I crawled into the back seat next to Angela and Tyler, announcing that I'd already had my turn in the shotgun position. Angela just stared out the window at the escalating storm, and Lauren twisted around in the middle seat to occupy Tyler's attention, leaving me free to simply lay my head back on the seat and close my eyes and try very hard not to think.